In studio to discuss the Moody's decision is Economist Professor Raymond Parsons from the Northwest University School of Business and Government. Prof, a very good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning.
Prof, I think I remember it was about 3 months ago when we were talking about this and we're waiting in anticipation and talking about some of the things that needed to be done to make sure that, the ratings agencies didn't downgrade us. What did you make of Moody's? And bearing in mind the fact that most economists are saying that the other two have a good chance of actually downgrading South Africa, just one of them.
But just remember, we've also had the outcome from the Fitch agency as well overnight, where they have also left our rating unchanged, but they've changed the outlook down to negative. Mm-hmm. But I think one's opening remarks must be, this is a very good morning for the South African economy, whichever way you want to look at it, because of this big debate and all the effort that has preceded what has happened in the last day or so. And of course, there's still the Standard & Poor decision to come next week. But if we reflect on this, it's not just good for the South African economy. I think it's very important to make that at the outset. It's important for all South Africans that we retain our investment grading, a stable financial environment, so that we can get on with the other things we want to do, to address growth, unemployment. All these things are part of this bigger picture. But we now have to use this time wisely. There's still a sword of Damocles in the distance hanging there, but we've given more time to get our house in order, both economically and politically. And now it's up to us to take this challenge. Don't hide behind world events over which we cannot influence very much. But the fact is, let's look at what the challenges are we've taken on, especially this very cooperative relationship between government, business and labour. It's starting to show some dividends, but it needs to be sustained. And I think the message we're getting from these two agencies is, you're on probation, we're watching you, we're comfortable with what you've done so far, but there are a lot of caveats. And we will have to address those caveats so that we don't play this brinkmanship every 6 months. I mean, that's not good for certainty either. We want to get out of the cycle and say, get these agencies off our backs. Let's get a stronger, bigger, better economy which will look forward to these assessments and not look at them with great trepidation every 6 months. So I think the thing is to build now on these decisions. And as the Minister of Finance has stressed, we must now get down to the further intensive work that we need in order to be able to deal with the situation over the next 6 to 12 months.
Prof, that's very interesting, because I remember the first time you were here, I asked you what needed to happen in order for the economy to grow. Now, we grew by 0.5%, and that means we were doing something right. But what do you think were the main contributing factors to this growth?
Well, I think we mustn't be too comfortable with a 0.5% growth. You can't do much with 0.5%, but it's better than a recession. And it is saying that we seem to have bottomed out, and if we do the right things, make the right choices, whether it's in the budget or in our structural reforms, in the labour market issues that we still have to address and indeed decide upon, then we can begin to turn the economy around. And when we look in terms, say, of, for example, the National Development Plan, we really have to grow at 3, 4, 5% to make a dent on unemployment, to make a big difference to what we want to do about poverty and so forth. All those good things require higher growth. All roads eventually lead through the growth rate, an inclusive growth rate. And of course, the next budget in February, which is where the other shoe will drop in terms of taxes, because in the mini budget we saw government spending, government borrowing, and all those numbers, of course. Now, there'll be a lot of debate about that, because we've got to be very importantly focused on taking the right tax decisions. Otherwise, we're not going to get the growth prospects we want. So there are still big challenges ahead, but I think it's reassuring for us to know that we've been given this extra time. But in this time, we have to walk the talk and deliver.
Prof, I mean, in layman's term, please explain to our viewers and myself, we're currently at Baa2 with a negative outlook. What does that translate into?
No, that means that as far as Moody's is concerned, they are 2 notches above junk status. So there's a margin there. They are still on the negative outlook, which is a warning signal. We're watching you, and there is a risk of a downgrade in the future. That's that sword of Damocles to which I referred earlier. In the case of Fitch, they've actually left us at one notch above junk, but they have reduced the forecast or the outlook from stable to negative. That's another warning signal. So amidst the good news, we must understand what hard work and what big challenges still lie ahead for all of us.
Professor, is a sovereign credit rating a judgment of the health of the country, or is it simply a rating of the government's ability to pay back its debt?
Well, the point of departure is, of course, the government's ability to pay its debt. But in arriving at that assessment, you have to take a number of factors into account. The state of public finances, the state of the economy, business confidence, the growth prospects. I come back to the point. If you want tax revenues, you must have growth so that you can get your share of tax revenues. So that's quite important. So all these other variables, including some of the political noise, all feed into the ultimate decision. But it's not I don't think that the credit rating agencies see it as their function to get involved in, for example, party politics, but they say we cannot ignore what impact those factors might have on our economic performance or our ability to implement what we have said that we want to implement.
Now, Professor, you said we still have, it means we're buying time to basically get our house in order. How much time do we have? And what do we need to do in that little time that we have to get our house in order?
Well, the credit rating agencies come every 6 months. And actually, we want to get out of that cycle. But they'll be back in 6 months' time. And then by then, we'll have had a budget. We'll see what further outcomes that we'll get from this collaboration between government, labour and business. That's work in progress. We need to see more tangible outcomes. The bottom line will be if in 6 months' time we can say we are in fact growing more rapidly, we are beginning to build up new and better business and investor confidence, and above all, that we can say to the man and woman in street, look, we're getting on top of these issues. We need to worry less about what the credit rating agencies are saying because we're busy building a bigger, stronger and better economy. If we can consolidate that message, then we can begin to get out of the woods.
You know, Professor, when I was asking you about some of the biggest contributors, one of the answers you mentioned there was, of course, the recent successful local government elections. But a lot of people have also attributed this to the recent announcement of the minimum wage deal. Do you think it had any effect?
I think it's all part of the bigger package. I think the important point here is that its good governance is certainly a part of your ability to handle your public finances, to deal with corruption, to have a stable labour market. That's one of the requirements that has been stipulated from time to time by the credit rating agencies. We want a more stable labour market. And when we understand that in terms of the Global Competitiveness Index recently, that out of 144 countries in the field of labour relations and labour matters, we are 144 out of 144. We can only go up. So I think it's very important that these discussions within NEDLAC lead to indeed positive outcomes and build a sufficient consensus on how we can make the labour market more functional and be able to make it more employment friendly. That's another important part of the challenge, all part of the bigger picture on taking the right decisions about South Africa's future.
Professor, let's speculate. I'm a firm believer of your projections. I mean, look where we are 3 months later, and this is exactly what you predicted. But what can we expect from the other two ratings agencies in a week's time?
Well, I think the outstanding one, the important one now, is, of course, Standard & Poor. That's next week. They are independent. I mean, they don't follow each other, but they look at the same evidence. We must understand that these verdicts from the credit rating agencies, they are professional verdicts, they are economic verdicts. It's not the gospel. There is room for difference of opinion and difference of interpretation. But they are all more or less pointing in the same direction, even if at slightly different levels. There is no compromise on the overall message that South Africa has to get both its economics and its politics right in order to get them off our backs, if I can put it that way. And I think in the time we've got at our disposal, we must take on board their message. They're not saying things that South African experts and analysts are not saying, but they're holding up a mirror. And they're important because of their impact on the money markets, on our cost of borrowing and so forth. So I think we mustn't waste too much time shooting the messenger, but rather ask ourselves, what is the messenger saying? But above all, take the right decisions because they are the right decisions. And in that process, we satisfy some of the criteria and the criticisms that have been raised by the credit rating agencies. The country as a whole will ultimately be much better off.
So you mean that we must stop being in denial, Professor? That's what you're basically saying. Thank you so much for joining us this morning and for that sound analysis. That was Economist Professor Raymond Parsons from the Northwest University School of Business as well as Governance. And he was talking to us about the ratings agencies being in the country. And of course, one of them has kept us on that negative outlook. More news.